It was a moment that would forever change the way people saw not just Shaquille O'Neal, but the power dynamics that shape our world. Shaq had just wrapped up a charity event in New York, feeling good about his work, eager to get home to his family. His private jet was waiting at the hangar, and he couldn't wait to unwind after a long day. But when he approached the entrance to the jet, something unexpected happened. A security guard stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Excuse me, sir. I can't let you through," the guard said, his voice calm but with an underlying tone of authority. Shaquille stopped, momentarily confused. He was used to security, of course, but this felt different. "What do you mean?" "I'm Shaquille O'Neal. I'm supposed to be on that jet," he said, pointing toward his plane. The guard stood firm, almost too firm. "I'm afraid I can't let you on without clearance. You don't have the right to board." The words were simple, but the tension in the air thickened. Shaq's mind raced. This wasn't the first time he'd dealt with airport security, but there was something about this guard, something that didn't sit right. Shaquille raised an eyebrow, his large figure towering over the guard. "Look, I'm not going to play this game. I'm Shaquille O'Neal. I'm not some random guy you can just block like that." But the guard didn't budge. Instead, he locked eyes with Shaq, his gaze hardening. "I don't care who you are. You're not getting on that jet unless I say so," he snapped. There was an eerie silence for a moment. Shaquille's mind whirled. He had been through a lot in his career: racism, prejudice, and countless misunderstandings, but this was different. It wasn't just a simple case of mistaken identity or a security error. No, there was something deeper here, something far more troubling. Shaquille took a deep breath. He could feel the eyes of a few bystanders starting to watch. The situation was escalating, and it was clear that the guard wasn't going to back down. What was happening here? He thought to himself. Was this truly happening in 2024? The words he had heard so many times in his career, "You're not welcome," suddenly echoed in his mind. But this wasn't just about being blocked from a flight. This was a moment in time where something bigger was at play. The world would be watching, and Shaquille O'Neal wasn't about to let this moment pass. He took one more step forward, his voice calm but with a hint of something far more powerful behind it. "You might not let me on that plane, but trust me, you won't stop me from making sure everyone knows exactly what's going on here." And with that, everything changed. The guard's face tightened. He hadn't expected this response. Shaquille O'Neal wasn't just a basketball legend, he was someone who had the power to make the world listen. And that guard, in that moment, was about to learn that firsthand. As the tension between Shaquille O'Neal and the guard thickened, the crowd that had begun to gather around them started whispering among themselves. Some seemed confused, others were ready to watch the drama unfold. Shaquille could sense the shifting energy. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was bigger. It was about everyone who had ever been held back, underestimated, or treated unfairly. The guard, still standing firmly in his place, finally spoke, his words cutting through the heavy air. "I said, you're not getting on that jet. And that's final. This is for your own good." The words seemed rehearsed, as though he'd said them 1,000 times before. Shaquille was taken aback. The guard wasn't acting like someone who had just made a mistake, he was acting as if this was personal. Shaquille's eyes narrowed. He could feel his blood begin to boil, but he kept his composure. "For my own good? You think blocking me from my jet is what's best for me?" he asked, his voice low and measured. "You're not in a position to make that call. Nobody is." But the guard didn't back down. "I don't care who you are, how famous you are. You're just like everyone else here. You don't get special treatment." The guard shot back, his tone growing colder. Shaquille could see where this was going. This wasn't about protocol. This was about a man who had decided he could use his power to bring down someone bigger than himself. Shaq had dealt with this before in many forms, whether it was on the court, in his business ventures, or even in the public eye. But this moment felt different. This time it was more personal. Before Shaquille could respond, a soft voice called out from behind the crowd. "Is there a problem here?" Shaquille turned to see a woman in a sleek business suit walking toward them, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. She was clearly in charge, her confident stride and sharp features made it clear she wasn't someone you ignored. The guard hesitated, then looked at the woman. "This man is attempting to board his plane without proper clearance," he said, his voice now tinged with defensiveness. The woman's eyes shifted to Shaquille, then back to the guard. "And who gave you the authority to decide who gets on and who doesn't?" she asked coolly. Her words were calm, but they carried weight. The guard stammered, clearly caught off guard by the question. I was just doing my job," he muttered, almost as if trying to convince himself. Shaquille, feeling the pressure of the moment, stepped forward. "You were doing your job, or were you doing something else?" he asked, his voice rising just enough to make the crowd take notice. "Because this is more than just a job. This is about something else entirely." The woman looked at Shaquille with a slight nod. Then, without saying another word, she turned back to the guard. "I suggest you step aside," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "This isn't something you want to escalate." The guard hesitated for a moment, clearly unsure whether to obey. But then, in a move that shocked everyone, he stepped back, lowering his gaze. The crowd let out a collective sigh, and the tension seemed to dissipate just a little. But Shaquille knew this wasn't over. He stepped past the guard and made his way toward the jet. But as he approached, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would follow him long after he left the airport. Something wasn't right here, and he was determined to find out exactly what had just happened. He could sense the deep, simmering injustice that lay beneath the surface of this encounter. As Shaquille boarded the jet, his mind raced. Was this just an isolated incident? Or was there something bigger at play? Something that could affect not only him but everyone who faced injustice. He had the platform, the voice, and now the responsibility to make sure the truth came to light. The world would soon know exactly what had transpired here today. And that, Shaquille knew, was only the beginning. As the jet ascended into the sky, Shaquille O'Neal leaned back in his seat, his mind still reeling from the encounter. The cabin was quiet, save for the hum of the engines. He closed his eyes, but the images kept playing in his head of the guard's face, his words, and the subtle, yet unmistakable sense of entitlement that oozed from every move he made. It wasn't just about the jet or the guard's authority. It was about something deeper, something that had been simmering for far too long. The woman who had intervened, the one with the business suit, had seemed calm and collected. But Shaquille knew there was more to her than just her polished exterior. She hadn't just stopped the situation, she had done her situation. It wasn't just about one man being stopped at the gate. It was a reflection of something much larger, the way the world often works against those who don't fit a certain mold. The guard's behavior wasn't just prejudice. It was a reminder of how deeply ingrained discrimination could be, even in the most unexpected places. As the hours passed, Shaquille's mind wouldn't let go of the encounter. He had handled it the right way, of course. He had remained calm, kept his composure, and made sure the world would hear his side of the story. But what if he hadn't been Shaquille O'Neal? What if it had been someone else? Someone without his platform, his fame, or his resources? The question gnawed at him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't an isolated incident. He had seen this play out before in the eyes of young men he had mentored, in the stories shared with him by friends, and in the countless headlines that reported on injustice after injustice. When he landed, Shaquille didn't waste any time. He immediately called his lawyer. "We need to make sure this gets investigated," he said firmly. "I want to know everything about that guard. Who he is, where he's from, and why he thought he had the right to treat me like that." It wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't about suing for some quick payday. No, this was bigger than that. This was about standing up for the countless individuals who were constantly being blocked, just like he was. People who had their dignity stripped away without a second thought. People who were told they weren't welcome, just because of who they were. This was about making sure that this kind of behavior didn't go unchecked. But as Shaquille made the call, something he wasn't expecting happened. The woman from earlier, the one who had intervened, called him back. She introduced herself as Lisa Martin, a legal consultant with a background in civil rights. She wasn't just any businesswoman, she was someone who had been fighting for equality for years. "I saw what happened," Lisa said over the phone. "And I know what you're thinking. But this isn't something you can just let go. This isn't just about you. It's about everyone who's faced discrimination in their lives." Shaquille's eyes widened. He had a feeling Lisa wasn't just another suit in the crowd. I thought you were just a random person in a suit, he said with a hint of a smile. But I see I was wrong. Lisa didn't laugh. I've been fighting for change my entire career. But it's not enough. Not until people like you start speaking up, too. Her words hit harder than he expected. For the first time, Shaquille felt like someone truly understood what he was feeling. It wasn't just a random act of injustice anymore, it was a battle that would take more than one person to win. It would take a community, a voice, and a movement. As the conversation ended, Shaquille felt a new sense of purpose stir within him. This wasn't just an isolated incident at an airport. It was part of something bigger, something that required action. He had always been an athlete, a businessman, a mentor, but now, he knew he had a role to play in something far more important. And with that realization came a new weight. A weight he would carry proudly, knowing that his voice could make a difference. This wasn't just about defending himself, it was about defending everyone who had ever been pushed aside or silenced. It was time for change. The next few days were a blur for Shaquille. He couldn't stop thinking about what Lisa had said. It's about everyone who's faced discrimination. Every moment seemed to reinforce the reality of those words. The media picked up the story quickly, and before he knew it, Shaquille's name was in every headline. But this time it wasn't just about basketball or his celebrity status. It was about the message he had just unwittingly started to spread. Shaquille knew he was walking a fine line. The world didn't always like it when celebrities spoke out about issues of race and power. He had seen it before, how quickly a cause could be twisted into a media frenzy. How quickly the very people who needed the change most could be drowned out by noise. But he also knew that with his platform came responsibility. This wasn't about fame or profit. It was about doing what was right. Soon after, Lisa reached out again. Shaquille, I've been contacted by several organizations who want to help amplify your voice, she said, her tone urgent but composed. But we need to take action now. If we don't make this a movement, it's be another headline that fades away. Shaquille paused for a moment, taking in her words. It was clear now, the moment he had stepped off that plane, he had become part of something much bigger. His name was attached to a fight for justice that was much deeper than one encounter with a racist airport guard. He could no longer just sit back and watch. He had to act, and act quickly. I'm in, Shaquille said without hesitation. What do we need to do? Lisa explained a series of steps. First, we need to get a full investigation into that guard's behavior. And we need to expose the system that allowed him to treat you like that in the first place. But we also need to make sure that this story doesn't stop here. This needs to be about the bigger picture, the way people of color, especially in positions of power, are often treated as less than. Shaquille felt the weight of those words. It wasn't just a matter of this one racist guard, it was about how society had normalized these kinds of abuses. Shaquille had seen this type of thing before. He had been the victim of it, and he had witnessed it countless times through his years in the spotlight. But now, it wasn't just about standing up for himself, it was about standing up for everyone who had faced that same treatment. The media storm continued to swirl around him. Talk shows invited him to speak. News outlets, social media platforms, everyone wanted a piece of the story. But Shaquille wasn't just giving sound bites for the cameras. He was using every opportunity to spread the message he now knew he had to deliver. He wasn't just talking about injustice, he was showing it. He wasn't just saying it was wrong. He was proving it, through his actions and his words. One evening he found himself on a major news network, sitting across from a respected anchor. The topic of the conversation was obvious. Shaquille, you've become the face of a movement now. What's next for you? What do you hope to achieve with all of this attention? Shaquille looked into the camera, his expression calm, but his voice steady. I want to see real change, he said, his words carrying the weight of every injustice he had witnessed, both personal and public. I want to see systems change. I want to see people stop thinking that this kind of treatment is okay. We've been silent for too long. We've let this kind of behavior slide. But now, it's time to act. This isn't just about me, it's about all of us. Every person who's been treated like they don't matter. The anchor nodded, clearly moved by his words. That's a powerful message, Shaquille. But with all this attention, you're going to face backlash. How do you prepare for that? Shaquille smiled, but there was no humor in his expression. Backlash doesn't scare me. People have been fighting for change forever. I'm just one voice in a sea of many. If they want to push back, I'll keep pushing forward. This fight is bigger than me, and I'm not backing down. The interview ended and Shaquille stood up, feeling more certain than ever. This wasn't just about a moment of outrage. This was a call to action. He was ready to lead, to push the conversation forward, and to be part of the solution. But he also knew that this was just the beginning. The next few weeks were filled with meetings, press conferences, and strategy sessions. But no matter how busy he got, Shaquille made sure to stay in touch with Lisa. They spoke often, planning the next steps of their movement. Together, they worked to create a platform for people who felt voiceless. They launched a campaign for justice, focusing not just on police brutality or discrimination in the workplace, but on every aspect of life where people were denied equal treatment because of their race. Shaquille's commitment to the cause was unwavering. Every step he took, every interview he gave, brought him closer to a world where people would no longer be judged by the color of their skin, but by their character. But he knew it would take time. It would take persistence, and it would take everyone coming together. But Shaquille wasn't afraid of the challenge. In fact, it was the challenge that had been calling him all along. Shaquille's message was resonating louder than ever. His campaign for justice was taking on a life of its own. The media storm had only grown, and while it brought more attention to the cause, it also brought more opposition. People who had once praised him for his basketball talent were now questioning his role in a political movement. Some called him a hero, while others labeled him as an agitator, a man who was stirring up trouble where it didn't exist. But Shaquille didn't mind the labels. He had been labeled all his life too big, too loud, too different. He knew what it felt like to be misunderstood, and this time he wasn't going to back down. The world was seeing the real Shaquille O'Neal now, not just a basketball player, but a man willing to stand up for what was right, regardless of the cost. One evening, as he sat in his office scrolling through social media, Shaquille came across a post that shook him to his core. A viral video showed a young black man being harassed by a group of police officers. The man wasn't doing anything wrong, he was simply walking down the street. The officers were rough with him, using force without cause. Shaquille watched in silence, the weight of it hitting him deep. It wasn't the first time he had seen something like this, but it was the first time he felt it in his bones, a visceral reminder that the fight for justice was far from over. He immediately called Lisa. "We need to do something about this," he said, his voice urgent. "This is happening everywhere. Every day. People are getting hurt, getting killed for nothing." Lisa's voice was steady on the other end. "I know, Shaquille. And I think this is the next chapter in your story. People are listening to you now. They need to hear me, dear." Shaquille nodded, already formulating a plan. "We need to go to the streets. We need to show people that we're not just talking about this issue from a distance. We need to be right there with them." It wasn't long before Shaquille began organizing rallies, using his platform to bring attention to the issue of police brutality and racial injustice. His rallies were massive, filled with people from all walks of life, united by the same cause. Shaquille was no longer just speaking for the people. He was standing with them. And as he took to the streets, he saw firsthand the power of collective action. The anger, the hope, the resilience, it was all there. And it was contagious. But as Shaquille stood at the forefront of this movement, he also saw something else, the divide that was beginning to grow. Some of his supporters were becoming more radical, pushing for extreme actions. Others, like Lisa, cautioned against alienating potential allies. They knew that to make real change, they had to keep the message clear: peaceful protests, legal reforms, and unity. But even as Shaquille tried to balance the growing tension, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were getting out of hand. It was one thing to fight for change, it was another to risk everything they had worked for. One night, after a particularly intense rally, Shaquille sat alone in his car, staring out at the city lights. He felt conflicted. Was he making a real difference, or was he just adding fuel to a fire that might burn everything down? The pressure was mounting. The more successful the campaign became, the more enemies Shaquille seemed to acquire. He received threatening messages. There were whispers of sabotage, of people who wanted him silenced. But the more pressure he faced, the more resolute he became. This wasn't just about him. It was about something much bigger. The next morning, Shaquille received a call that stopped him cold. Lisa's voice was filled with concern. Shaquille, we've just learned that the guard who blocked you from your jet has been transferred to a new job at another airport, and worse, he's been promoted. Shaquille's heart sank. The idea that the system could reward someone for such blatantly racist behavior was maddening, but he didn't let the anger consume him. Instead, he did what he always did. He used it to fuel the fire. "This isn't over," Shaquille said, his voice calm but intense. "We have to take this even further. This can't just be about what happened to me. It has to be about the system that protects people like him. We're going after the root of the problem now." And that's exactly what he did. Shaquille took legal action, working with top lawyers to file lawsuits and demand accountability for the airport, the airline, and everyone involved in the incident. The legal battle was long, grueling, and often discouraging. But Shaquille kept going, knowing that every lawsuit, every investigation, every piece of evidence would help dismantle the system that allowed racist actions to thrive. As the weeks went by, Shaquille found himself in more meetings, more press conferences, and more heated debates. But he also found moments of peace, moments when he could look around and see that his fight was making a difference. Slowly but surely, people were waking up. The rallies were growing, the support was swelling, and the voices of those who had been silenced for so long were finally being heard. Shaquille knew that the fight wasn't over, and that the road ahead would be difficult. But he also knew that with each step they were getting closer to justice. He had become more than a symbol. He had become the change he wanted to see in the world. And as he looked out at the crowd during one of his rallies, Shaquille O'Neal felt the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. If only for a moment, they were making history. The world was watching. As Shaquille continued to push forward with his cause, he began to notice that the media coverage was starting to shift. It wasn't just about his fame anymore, it was about the movement he had ignited. More and more celebrities, athletes, and public figures were coming out to support him. The rallies were growing in size, and the messages of hope and justice were being amplified across the nation. Shaquille was no longer alone in this fight. The world had joined him. But not everyone was on board. The backlash was intense, especially from those who felt threatened by the changes he was advocating for. The media, in particular, was filled with mixed messages. Some outlets praised his courage, while others painted him as a troublemaker. There were those who questioned his methods, asking if peaceful protests were enough. Others insisted that Shaquille was too outspoken, too controversial for someone in his position. The most frustrating part of it all was the way some people were trying to discredit the movement itself. They accused him of being a puppet, of using the cause as a platform for personal gain. It stung. Shaquille had always given his all to his community, both on and off the court. But this new kind of criticism was different. It wasn't about his basketball career anymore, it was about his very character. And the attacks were relentless. But Shaquille refused to let the negativity derail him. He couldn't afford to. This wasn't just about him, it was about the countless others who had been mistreated, whose voices had been ignored for far too long. The reality of what was at stake weighed heavily on him, but it also fueled him to keep going. One evening, after a particularly grueling press conference, Shaquille found himself sitting in his hotel room, staring at the ceiling. He was exhausted, physically and mentally. The constant pressure was taking its toll. His mind raced with thoughts of his family, his career, and the future of the movement. Would it succeed? Or was he just fighting a battle he couldn't win? His phone buzzed. It was a message from Lisa. "Shaq, I know you're tired, but we've got to keep pushing. The people need you. Don't let the hate take over. You're stronger than this." Shaquille smiled softly. Lisa had always been there for him, and in moments like this, when doubt crept in, her words reminded him why he started this journey in the first place. The cause wasn't about being perfect, it was about being relentless. It was about fighting for those who had no voice. Determined to continue, Shaquille doubled down on his efforts. He started working even closer with grassroots organizations, helping to spread the word in smaller communities that had been overlooked. He visited schools, spoke with young activists, and connected with people who had lived through the very experiences he was fighting against. He realized that the real power was in these communities, the ones that had been silenced for so long but were now starting to rise up. As the movement gained momentum, Shaquille found himself in the thick of negotiations with lawmakers. He had gone from basketball courts to political arenas, fighting for the change he believed in. The conversations weren't easy, but Shaquille wasn't backing down. He wasn't interested in empty promises, he wanted real, tangible changes. His team of lawyers, activists, and allies worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that the movement would lead to policy reform and long-term solutions. One afternoon, Shaquille received an invitation that would change everything. It was a call from the White House. The president wanted to meet with him to discuss the progress of his campaign and the steps needed to move forward with real change. It was a historic moment, and the weight of it was not lost on him. Walking into the Oval Office, Shaquille couldn't help but feel the gravity of the moment. Here he was, a man who had once been overlooked, dismissed, and criticized for his size and his opinions, now standing at the heart of the country's political power. But Shaquille wasn't there for himself. He was there for the millions of people whose lives had been torn apart by systemic injustice. The president greeted him with a firm handshake. "Shaquille, I've been following your work. You've stirred up quite a storm, and I have to say, I admire your courage. This country needs more leaders like you." Shaquille nodded, but his thoughts were focused on the bigger picture. It's not about me. It's about the people. We've got to fix this. We can't keep ignoring what's happening in our streets. It's time for real change, and it starts with us. The president listened intently, and after a long conversation, they agreed on a set of policy proposals that would address police reform, voting rights, and the economic disparities faced by black communities. It was a breakthrough. It wasn't everything, but it was a step forward. Shaquille walked out of the White House that day with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. He wasn't just a basketball player. He was a change maker, a leader who had taken on the system and started to make it bend toward justice. The work was far from over, but Shaquille knew this was just the beginning. The fight for justice was still ongoing, and he was ready to keep pushing. He had become more than just a figure on the court. He had become a symbol of resistance, of strength, and of hope. And as he walked out into the crisp air of Washington, D.C., Shaquille O'Neal felt the weight of history upon his shoulders, knowing that his legacy would be defined not just by his basketball career, but by the change he had helped create. The world was changing, and Shaquille was leading the way. The news of Shaquille's meeting with the president hit the media waves like a tidal wave. Headlines across the country screamed of his breakthrough, and social media exploded with a flurry of opinions, both positive and negative. To some, Shaquille was a hero, a beacon of hope for the oppressed. To others, he was a divisive figure who had crossed a line into politics where he didn't belong. But Shaquille knew that no matter the backlash, he had made an impact. The doors were now open for real dialogue. As the political discussions began to unfold, Shaquille's focus shifted. He had already made waves in Washington, but now it was time to take his message directly to the people. The rallies grew larger, and with each one, his presence became more powerful. No longer just a basketball player, Shaquille had become a symbol of defiance, a voice for those who had been unheard for too long. His speeches were electrifying, raw, authentic, and deeply emotional. He wasn't speaking from a script, he was speaking from the heart. One day, while preparing for another rally, Shaquille received an unexpected call. It was from a man named David, an influential billionaire and philanthropist who had been quietly supporting the movement behind the scenes. David had been watching Shaquille's rise and saw something in him that he admired: courage, leadership, and the power to create change. "I believe you're on the verge of something big," Shaquille, David said. "But I think it's time you escalate your game. We need a platform that's bigger than rallies. You need to take this message to every corner of the world." Shaquille listened carefully as David laid out his vision: a global campaign, with a massive media presence that would push for social and racial equality on a scale never seen before. This wasn't just about reform anymore, it was about revolutionizing how the world viewed racism, justice, and equity. David offered his financial resources, his connections, and his platform to help Shaquille make it happen. It was an offer Shaquille couldn't refuse. But there was something about it that felt different, too polished, too calculated. David's tone had shifted subtly, and for a moment, Shaquille couldn't shake the feeling that he was being used for something more than just a noble cause. He had learned to trust his instincts, and they were telling him to be cautious. Still, Shaquille couldn't ignore the opportunity. He needed to move fast if the momentum of his movement was to last. He agreed to meet with David and his team the following week to discuss the campaign in more detail. The meeting was held in a luxurious penthouse office overlooking the city skyline. David, his assistants, and a few high-profile media professionals sat across from Shaquille, presenting him with a comprehensive plan. The campaign would feature commercials, interviews, documentaries, and billboards every possible avenue to make the world see the issues Shaquille had been fighting for. But as the plan unfolded, Shaquille started to feel the weight of it all. It wasn't just about the message anymore, it was about branding, image control, and making sure that the right narrative was pushed. The media moguls in the room were already talking about market value, target demographics, and sponsorships. Shaquille's heart began to sink. This was no longer just about a movement, it was becoming a business. Shaquille, we know you're committed to this cause. But you're also a brand now. We have to manage that brand carefully, one of the media professionals said with a rehearsed smile. Shaquille sat there in silence for a moment, feeling a pit form in his stomach. He had never wanted to be anyone's puppet. He had worked too hard to get where he was, to let his message be hijacked by corporate interests. He wanted change, not a marketing campaign. I appreciate the offer, David, but I have to be honest with you, Shaquille said, his voice steady but firm. This isn't about a brand or business for me. It's about the people. It's about real, lasting change. David's expression shifted slightly. He was no longer smiling, and the warmth in his voice evaporated. You can't change the world without resources, Shaquille. You know that. We have the means to make this movement global, but you need to play by the rules. Shaquille leaned forward. I'm not here to play by anyone's rules but my own. I've built my career on my terms, and I'm going to do the same with this movement. If that's not something you can support, then I'll find another way. David's face hardened, and for a brief moment, the air in the room felt thick with tension. But then David exhaled sharply and nodded. All right, Shaquille. If that's how you want to play it, I respect it. But understand that you're going to face a lot of opposition. This isn't an easy fight. Shaquille stood up, his resolve clear. I've been facing opposition my whole life, David. It's nothing new. But if I'm going to do this, I'm doing it my way. Shaquille walked out of the penthouse, feeling lighter than he had in days. It wasn't just the weight of the conversation that had lifted. He realized that by rejecting David's offer, he had reclaimed control of his movement. This wasn't going to be a corporate-sponsored, watered-down version of the truth. It was going to be the raw, unfiltered reality of the struggle. As he left the building, Shaquille looked up at the skyline once more. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he was not going to stop. This was bigger than him. It was bigger than any one person, any one company. It was about a future where justice prevailed, and no one was left behind. And Shaquille O'Neal was ready to fight for it, no matter the cost. As Shaquille prepared for his next steps, the weight of the decision to reject David's offer began to settle in. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. There would be critics, obstacles, and those who would try to silence him. But deep down, he felt an undeniable clarity, the kind that only comes when you're standing for something that truly matters. He started to map out his plan. It wasn't about flashy media campaigns or corporate sponsorships. It was about reaching the heart of the people, one by one. He knew the power of human connection, the way people could be moved by real stories, real struggles. That was his next mission, getting to the root of the issue, talking to those who had been ignored, and sharing their stories with the world. The first step was to hit the road again. Shaquille traveled to cities and towns that were rarely in the spotlight, meeting with community leaders, activists, and everyday people who were living through the struggles he spoke about. He wanted to hear their stories directly, to understand the issues they faced, and most importantly, to let them know they were not alone. In one small town, Shaquille met a young mother, Carla, who had been fighting for justice after her son had been wrongfully arrested by the police. The system had failed her family, and she was determined to make sure it didn't happen again. Her pain was evident. But so was her strength. She didn't have the fame or wealth to push for change, but her voice, though soft, carried a power that resonated with Shaquille. They told me my son would be nothing but a statistic, Carla told him, tears welling up in her eyes. But I'll be damned if I let them treat him like that. Shaquille listened intently, his heart aching for the pain she carried. He knew this was the real fight, the fight for those whose voices were drowned out by a broken system. He promised Carla that her story would not be forgotten, that he would amplify it in any way he could. From there, Shaquille traveled to other communities, each with its own heartbreaking yet inspiring story. He heard about the children who were growing up in neighborhoods torn apart by violence, about the elderly who had been neglected by a system that didn't care, and about families who had been torn apart by wrongful convictions and racial injustice. But as much as Shaquille's heart broke for these families, he also saw the incredible resilience within them. These were people who hadn't given up, who were fighting in ways that the world needed to see. And that's when Shaquille realized something powerful. The stories weren't just about the injustice they faced, they were also about the strength they carried, the ways in which they were making a difference despite the odds. Shaquille began to document these stories, sharing them through social media, through interviews, and through personal video messages. His voice became one with theirs, and soon, it wasn't just Shaquille's fight, it was the fight of thousands, even millions, who had never been given the platform they deserved. But the more his movement grew, the more the opposition grew as well. Media outlets that had once praised his activism now began to question his methods. Was he a hero, or was he just another celebrity trying to gain attention? Did he really understand the struggle, or was he just using it for personal gain? And then came the attacks. They were subtle at first: tweets, news segments, and articles designed to undermine Shaquille's credibility. They painted him as a man trying to stir up trouble, a man who didn't know his place. But the attacks became louder and more vicious, especially when Shaquille's voice began to take on a sharper tone. He wasn't just advocating for reform anymore, he was demanding it. One night, as Shaquille sat in his hotel room, reading the latest barrage of negative press, a call came in. It was Carla. "They're attacking you," she said, her voice thick with worry. "I saw the news. They're trying to turn people against you." Shaquille took a deep breath. He'd expected this. They always came after the truth tellers, the ones who dared to challenge the system. "I knew it would happen," Carla, Shaquille said, his voice calm but resolute. "But I can't stop. Not now. Not when we're so close." "I'm with you, Shaquille," she replied. "We all are. Don't let them scare you." Her words were the fuel he needed. Shaquille wasn't backing down, no matter how many attacks came his way. In fact, each one only made him more determined to continue fighting, to push even harder. The next day, Shaquille released a powerful video message to the world, addressing the critics and those who tried to tear him down. He spoke with the same conviction he had shared with Carla and the countless others he had met along the way. "I'm not doing this for fame, I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this because this is what's right," Shaquille said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I'm doing this for every single person who's ever been ignored, every single person who's ever been oppressed. I will not back down." The video went viral. People from all walks of life, activists, celebrities, everyday citizens rallied behind him. The movement had gained a new level of momentum, and the pressure on the establishment grew heavier. Shaquille had made himself a target, but he had also made himself a symbol of resistance, of hope. But the battle was far from over. Shaquille knew that the real fight was just beginning. The road ahead would be long, and there would be sacrifices. But he was ready. He had ignited a fire, and nothing, not the media, not the powerful elites, could extinguish it. He would fight for justice, no matter what it took. And with every person who joined him, the flame grew stronger. Shaquille's determination was unwavering. As he moved forward, the landscape of the fight for justice shifted. It wasn't just about getting attention or spreading awareness anymore. It had become a full-fledged movement. More voices, more people, more communities were standing up alongside him, demanding change in a way that could no longer be ignored. Every day he received messages from all over the world, messages of support, messages of pain, messages of hope. People sent him their stories, their experiences with injustice, their dreams of a better future. Shaquille read them all. He knew that these stories weren't just abstract issues to be solved. They were the very heart of the fight. But with this growing movement came greater opposition. Powerful figures, the ones who had benefited from the status quo, began to push back in increasingly aggressive ways. Lawsuits, smear campaigns, and threats filled the headlines. It was clear that they would stop at nothing to silence Shaquille and anyone who dared to stand with him. One night, Shaquille received a call that made his blood run cold. It was from an anonymous source, a whistleblower who had worked closely with the political elite. "They're planning something big," the voice on the other end said. "They're going to use everything at their disposal to take you down." The warning hung in the air like a storm cloud. Shaquille knew that the road ahead would only get more dangerous, but in that moment, something shifted inside him. It wasn't fear that he felt, it was clarity. He understood now more than ever that the fight wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had been pushed to the margins, everyone who had been silenced for far too long. "I'm ready," Shaquille replied, his voice firm. In the days that followed, the attacks grew more personal. Stories began to surface, each one more damaging than the last. They dug deep into Shaquille's past, trying to find any flaw, any mistake, any piece of dirt they could use to discredit him. They painted him as a hypocrite, a man who cared only about himself, not the people he claimed to be fighting for. But Shaquille wasn't fazed. He didn't need to defend himself. He knew the truth. And more importantly, the people who had joined him in this fight knew the truth. They stood with him because they saw the genuine passion in his heart, the commitment to changing the system for good. And the more they tried to tear him down, the more Shaquille pushed forward. At a rally in one of the country's largest cities, Shaquille took the stage before thousands of people. The crowd erupted in applause as he stepped up to the microphone, his presence larger than life. But this time something was different. The energy in the air was palpable, charged with the urgency of the moment. Shaquille looked out at the sea of faces, each one filled with hope, anger, and determination. He could feel their pain, their hunger for change. And he knew that this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of them. "You all know what's at stake," Shaquille began, his voice carrying the weight of everything he had been through. "This fight isn't just about changing laws. It's about changing lives. It's about making sure that every person, no matter their skin color, no matter their background, is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve." The crowd grew silent as Shaquille continued. His words were simple, but they struck deep. "This is bigger than me. This is bigger than any of us. This is about the future we want to create for our children, for our families, for everyone who's been left behind." The crowd erupted into cheers, but Shaquille's eyes were focused on one thing: the future. He could see it now more clearly than ever. This fight wasn't going to be easy, but he knew they had the power to win. The energy in that stadium, in that moment, was something Shaquille would carry with him for the rest of his life. It was the fuel he needed to keep going. But just as Shaquille began to believe the tide was turning in their favor, something unexpected happened. David, the same wealthy businessman who had once offered Shaquille a deal, reappeared in the media. This time he wasn't speaking out against Shaquille, he was offering him a chance to negotiate. He claimed that he understood Shaquille's mission now, that he wanted to help. The offer was tempting, and Shaquille knew it. But something about it didn't sit right with him. He had learned the hard way that people like David didn't change overnight. There was something deeper at play, something he wasn't ready to fully confront yet. Shaquille turned down the offer, but David's presence still loomed large. For days, the media was abuzz with speculation. Some supported Shaquille's decision, applauding his refusal to compromise. Others accused him of being stubborn, of turning away an opportunity that could have benefited his cause. Shaquille didn't need to respond. He already knew what his next move was. He had fought too hard to get this far, and he wasn't going to let anyone divert him from his mission now. But the fight was far from over. As Shaquille continued to rally support and push for change, the establishment fought back with everything they had. It was clear that they would stop at nothing to protect the system that had kept them in power for so long. Shaquille knew the truth, though. He wasn't fighting for power or fame, he was fighting for the people who had been silenced for too long. And he would continue to fight, no matter the cost. Because the future was worth it. The future. And the people he was fighting for were worth every sacrifice. As the battle escalated, Shaquille's resolve only grew stronger. Every new challenge, every attack, only pushed him further into the heart of the fight. He could feel the weight of the movement on his shoulders, but he also felt the strength of the people around him. Their unwavering support reminded him why he started this fight in the first place. This was never about his personal success or fame, it was about creating a lasting change. The day came when he faced the culmination of all his efforts. It wasn't a grand public event or a big rally, it was something far more personal. He was invited to a closed-door meeting with several key lawmakers who had previously been some of his harshest critics. The media was buzzing, wondering whether this meeting would be another opportunity for compromise, or if Shaquille would hold his ground. As Shaquille walked into the room, the tension was thick. His presence alone commanded attention, and the eyes of the powerful figures around the table were fixed on him. He knew they were watching to see if he would bend, if he would accept their terms and walk away with a small victory. But Shaquille wasn't interested in small victories anymore. He took a seat, and without wasting a moment, he began to speak, his voice calm but firm. "I've seen enough to know that what we're talking about here goes beyond policy or politics," Shaquille said, his eyes locking with each of the lawmakers. "It's about the lives of real people, people who have been left behind by a system that was never designed to help them. People who have been treated as if their voices don't matter." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. He could feel the resistance from some of the figures around the table, but Shaquille didn't flinch. "I'm not here to make deals," he continued. "I'm here to make history. And if that means tearing down the walls that have held us all back, then I'm ready to do it. Are you?" The room was silent. The lawmakers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond. They knew Shaquille wasn't asking for permission anymore, he was making a statement. A statement that they could either join him in fighting for a better future, or be left behind in the old, broken system. The tension lingered for what felt like an eternity. Then one of the senior lawmakers, the same one who had once tried to dismiss Shaquille as a threat, stood up. "I think we've all underestimated you," he said quietly. "Perhaps it's time for us to listen." Shaquille nodded, his heart racing, but his resolve as firm as ever. This was it. This was the moment he had worked for, the tipping point where the impossible began to shift. As the meeting concluded, a sense of change hung in the air. The fight wasn't over, but this was the beginning of a new chapter. Shaquille had made his stand, and it had been heard. The walls that had been built around justice were beginning to crumble. But Shaquille knew the battle wasn't won in one room, or even one day. This was a long journey, one that would take every ounce of strength, every ounce of determination he had. And as he left the building, surrounded by the voices of those who had stood by him, Shaquille knew one thing for sure: he wasn't fighting alone anymore. He was fighting for a future where everyone could rise above the limitations imposed by society, a future where every person's voice would be heard, respected, and valued, a future where justice was no longer a privilege for the few, but a right for all. And with that, Shaquille O'Neal's mission continued, stronger and more determined than ever. The world had been shaken, but it was also on the edge of transformation. And Shaquille, now more than just a sports icon, had become the symbol of that change, a symbol of hope, of resilience, and of a fight that would never stop until true justice was achieved.